Hi. 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 My name's Caleb. I've always been fascinated with things that cannot be explained. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experiences in my own life that are unexplainable. I've always been someone that's driven by data, by things that have evidence, the scientific method, which makes it hard to believe in religion and faith, in spirits and ghosts, the great beyond. Because if I can't see it, if I can't touch it, then I have a hard time believing in it. And so I asked myself a few months ago, is there any event in history that has a substantial amount of evidence and is also kind of supernatural? And I came across something called the miracle of the sun. And so this video will be going over what I learned, why I find it fascinating, and what I think it may be, and what professionals who gather evidence and data, what they think it might have been. So without further ado, welcome to my channel, and I hope you enjoy the miracle of the sun. Our story begins in the spring of 1917. And to provide some context for the state the world was in at this point in time, it was grim. Unlike all of the wars before it, World War I was a turning point in warfare. Looking back 50 years ago from today, warfare is relatively the same. High-powered rifles, high-capacity machine guns, jets, tanks, battleships. Things have become more advanced, that's true, but compared to the change in warfare in the 50 years leading up to World War I, things were vastly different. This was warfare in the mid to late 1800s. Soldiers lining up in firing lines with single-shot muskets. Men riding horses, cavaliers with swords. And this was 50 years later. No longer were we reserved to men with single-shot muskets riding horses into battle. Countries now wielded terrible weapons of lethality and destruction. Machine guns capable of eliminating hundreds of men within a minute. Tanks like crawling iron giants, destroying anything in their path. Planes now fought overhead while long-range artillery and poison gas was thrown miles into the front lines. In a mere few decades, warfare had evolved into a horror that generations before could have never imagined. In totality, it's estimated that 40 million humans died during the span of the First World War. And living in such times came at a cost. Shortages ranged from food and raw resources to human life. While husbands, brothers, and sons marched to war, families stayed home and rationed their meals, rationed the heating for their homes, and the clothes they wore. To make matters worse, in the final years of the war, the Spanish flu broke out, spreading quickly across national borders and soon the entire world. The COVID pandemic is an unfortunate recent memory for most of us. And that pandemic claimed the lives of around 7 million individuals. Compared to the Spanish flu, on the low end, it's estimated to have killed 17 million people, and on the high end, 100 million. Most every place in the world was touched by war or pandemic, from sprawling cities to small farm towns, which is where our story takes us next. To a small village of less than 10,000 people called Fatima, Portugal. Now, the history of these events technically begin in 1916, but there's little information as to what actually happened in 1916. Maybe one or two events that took place in the spring, but there's little documentation. So for the sake of the story, we're going to look at what took place in 1917, which is where most of the documented events take place. And the first event that takes place is May 13th, 1917, where three children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta — I've done Duolingo for like a month. I apologize, my pronunciation's probably terrible. These children claimed that they were in the presence of an apparition, that an apparition had come to visit them and talk to them. But this apparition wasn't some wandering ghost or spirit, it was the Virgin Mary. Now, this report didn't come without any controversy. Some people believed that the children were making the story up. Some believed that it was politically motivated from a previous revolution that had happened years before, while others believed the children were telling the truth. So much so that some individuals even made a pilgrimage. Pilgrimage. Is that a word? Pilgrimage? They traveled to Fatima in hopes of having some spiritual enlightenment or blessing themselves. During 1917, 6 events took place in total. And these 6 events are what's summed up to be Our Lady Fatima. And at the very end of these events, in October of 1917, we have the miracle of the sun. And so we're going to go through these 6 events that begin on May 13th, 1917, and span throughout the spring and summer into the early fall. And then after we've went through those, we will get into the actual event that is the miracle of the sun.
Do not be afraid. I will do you no harm. I am from heaven. I came to ask you to come here on the 13th day for 6 months at this same time, and then I will tell you who I am and what I want. And afterwards, I will return here a 7th time. Yes, you, Lucia, will go to heaven. She, referring to Jacinta, also will go to heaven. Yes, Francisco will go to heaven. But first he must say many rosaries. Would you like to offer yourself to God to accept all the sufferings which he may send you in reparation for the countless sins by which he is offended, and in supplication for the conversion of sinners? Then you will have much to offer, but the grace of God will be your comfort.
So this is the first event in which the children actually meet the Virgin Mary. And again, there is a reference to something that took place in 1916, but nothing's documented. So we're going to assume this is the first time that they actually have an actual conversation with the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary specified to keep it a secret, to tell nobody. Again, as she mentions to Francisco, to pray to the rosaries every day. The Virgin Mary states that she will bring an end to the war if the children follow through on these commitments. Even though the Virgin Mary asked the children to keep this a secret, Jacinta told her mother, and disbelieving and thinking it some sort of joke, her mother told her neighbors, and it stated that by the end of the day that everybody in the town knew, which signifies how small this town actually is, that if word travels that quickly, it must be a small town.
I want you to come on the 13th day of next month and pray the rosary every day, and I want you to learn to read. If she, referring to a sick woman, is converted, she will be cured within a year. Yes, I will take Francisco and Jacinta soon, but you must remain on earth for some time. Jesus wishes to use you to make me better known and loved. He wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. No, my child, you will not be alone. And would that make you suffer? Do not be disheartened. My Immaculate Heart will never abandon you, but will be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God.
So the Virgin Mary comes back and meets with the children on the 13th of June, which she prophesied she would do back in May. She references how a sick woman will be healed if she can be converted, and then she brings some ominous news about how Lucia's two siblings are going to die relatively soon, and that they're going to be taken to heaven, following some prerequisites that they pray to the rosaries. Now this is scary. If I were Lucia in this situation, I'd be very concerned, and the Virgin Mary expresses that she recognizes she may be concerned, but fret not, that she will be taken care of, she will be watched over. Now, this sets up some foreshadowing as to what is to come, but the next meeting, which takes place in July, which again, the Virgin Mary says, I will meet you here a month from now on the 13th day of the month again. And when they meet this time in July, it sets up the rest of the story. It sets up what's about to happen in October. It's a really lengthy set of text and a lot is said, so I'm going to summarize it on the screen and read kind of over the bullet points, the main parts of it, to set the stage for the rest of the summer and into the early fall.
On the 13th of July, 1917, the Virgin Mary speaks to the children, and this is the first time that she confesses that she will be performing a miracle in October of the same year. She does this with the contingency that the children routinely come back to the spot in which they are meeting with her each month on the 13th day it's specified. And she also discusses the war. She mentions that the war is going to end, that people are offending God, that it's only going to get worse, so therefore she needs to intervene and help bring an end to the war. She also mentions something about Russia being converted and that the world will finally be in peace, that the good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, and various nations will be destroyed. But in the end, her Immaculate Heart will triumph. Lastly, she reminds the children to say the Rosary each day, and by doing so, this will help Jesus lead all of the lost souls back to heaven. This focuses a lot more on the war, the suffering of the world, and that if they dedicate themselves to praying and coming back to meeting with the Virgin Mary, she will bring an end to the war and perform a miracle for the world to see in October.
Now, when the children met with the Virgin Mary in July, this is the first time she tells the children that she's going to be performing a miracle in October. She doesn't specify what it is going to be, she just lets the children know that there will be a miracle. She also talks more about the war. She references Russia converting to Catholicism. She mentions that various countries or nations will be destroyed, but in the end there will be peace, and this will all be due to her Immaculate Heart. She does mention that the Holy Father will consecrate Russia, make it a holy land, and there will be peace in the world following this. It's also suggested that the children are shown a vision of the Pope being martyred, and they're told not to tell anybody of this. Now, the conversations that take place in August and September are relatively short. The dialogue between the children and the Virgin Mary, it's not very long, and so in this next part of the video, I'm going to address both August and September back to back, and that's going to set us up for October. October is where the miracle happens, and this is the big event that everything is leading up to. The Virgin Mary actually showing herself and performing a miracle.
Pray, pray a great deal and make many sacrifices. For many souls go to hell because they have no one to make sacrifices and to pray for them. Saint Joseph too will come with the Holy Child to bring peace to our world. Our Lord will also come to bless the people. Our Lady of the Rosary, Our Lady of Sorrows will come too. You must pray, continue to pray the Rosary every day in order to obtain the end of the war. In October, our Lord will come, and Our Lady of Sorrows and of Mount Carmel and Saint Joseph with the child Jesus to bless the world. God is pleased with your sacrifices, but He does not want you to sleep with the rope on. Wear it only during the day. Some I will cure, others not. In October, I shall perform a miracle so that everyone may believe.
So at this point in the story, the miracle is about to take place. Events that take place happen in front of anywhere between 30 and 100,000 people. At this point in time, we did have photography and some ability to record videos, but there isn't much video or photographic evidence of the events that take place here. There are some photographs. I do include one that is often attributed to the miracle of the sun. It's the picture of thousands of people staring, looking into the sky. This actually comes from a different solar event that takes place several years after the miracle of the sun. So with this, there isn't a whole lot of actual picture or video evidence of what these people see. And it hurts the story, but also makes it more mysterious and interesting, at least for myself, because what's described sounds truly fantastical. And there are some explanations provided by scholars outlining what may actually be happening, summing it up to actual solar phenomena that has been documented and recorded, while others state that they have no idea what it was. There's a first-hand witness that it's debated whether or not it's a professor from a university or if it's his son. We will get into that quote here in a minute. I hope you enjoy the depiction of the miracle of the sun, as it's something that truly fascinates me. And I think if I would have been there at that point in time, I would have been awestruck from what these people witness.
I am the Lady of the Rosary. I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask for pardons for their sins. They must not offend our Lord any more, for He is already too grievously offended by the sins of men. People must say the Rosary. Let them continue saying it every day. I would like a chapel built here in my honor. The war will end soon. Tens of thousands stand quiet, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the miracle that would soon take place. Many report a dreary overcast, rain clouds, and a faded sun. For a while this weather held, clouds slowly passing overhead, then suddenly the clouds began to part, giving way to an opaque sun bathing the lands in multicolored lights. Some claimed the sky and earth were painted in violet. Others noted that the sun began to spin, zigzag, and spiral towards the earth. The ground, wet and damp from the rain, suddenly dried and became firm. Wet plants now stood dry, as if no rain had passed. Clothes worn by witnesses, once soaked, were now dry as well. There is a depiction from a first-hand witness, though it's disputed if this depiction comes from Gonzalo Garrett, a natural science professor from Coimbra University, or his son, Jose Garrett. Either way, the quote goes as follows. During the solar phenomenon, there were changes of color in the atmosphere. Looking at the sun, I noticed that everything around was becoming darkened. I looked first at the nearest objects, and then extended my glance further afield as far as the horizon. I saw everything in an amethyst color. Objects around me, the sky and the atmosphere, were of the same color. An oak tree nearby threw a shadow of this color on the ground. Fearing that I was suffering from an affection of the retina, an improbable explanation because in that case, one could not see things purple-colored, I turned away and shut my eyes. Keeping my hands before them to intercept the light, with my back still turned, I opened my eyes and saw that the landscape was the same purple color as before. And, in fact, everything, both near and far, had changed, taking on the color of old yellow Damascus. People looked as if they were suffering from jaundice, and I recall a sensation of amusement at seeing them look so ugly and unattractive. All of the phenomena which I have described were observed by me in a calm and serene state of mind, and without any emotional disturbance. It is for others to interpret and explain them.
The town I live in is about 5,000 people, 6,000 people at the max. I think it's closer to the 4,000, 5,000 range. And to think that not only everyone from my town, but if 10 or 20 towns worth of people were all at the same spot and witnessed the same solar phenomenon, following 3 children saying that it was going to take place on that specific day at that place and time, that would blow my mind. I don't know how this is something that I've never heard before, and when I stumbled across it, I was mind blown because I, again, have never experienced anything like this, and I wish I would have been there to at least see it. To put it in perspective, if today we had 3 children that were claiming that they were in communication with the Virgin Mary at a specific point in time, the Virgin Mary was going to perform a miracle, and thousands of people show up, not even thousands, tens of thousands of people show up, and they witness some form of solar phenomenon where the sun spirals, zigzags, and then careens to the earth, and everything's painted in a violet color. That would be all over the internet. And the issue we have today is that it may be AI, CGI. Hopefully we'd have more cameras to capture the event, but again, it would be met with a lot of criticism that it was fake. But looking at today and in the last 50 years, I'm not aware of anything where there's been upwards of 100,000 people witnessing the same phenomena. And not only do they witness it, but the Catholic Church comes out and canonizes the event, says that it's a true supernatural experience. Now, I find this miracle to be fascinating. And the biggest reason is because I've never experienced anything like this in my own life. And I think to myself, if I would have been there in 1917 and would have watched the sun spiral, zigzag, drench the ground in a violet color, and then suddenly everything looks yellow, people look yellow, and thousands of people are seeing this at the same time I am, I'd probably have my mind blown. Now, this story doesn't come without any criticism. The biggest criticism is that a lot of individuals there didn't see anything that took place, while others see the sun spiraling and zigzagging. Others don't see that, they just see the violet colors. Now, skeptics claim that these colors, that the light, the sun moving, could have been something called a sundog, or more scientific term is called a perihelion. A perihelion. 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 A mock sun. I like that word. They called it a mock sun, a fake sun, fake news, fake sun.
You are fake news.
They refer to it as a sundog, and I have seen a sundog before.
Fake news.
I've seen a sundog once, and it was beautiful. It has to happen when the sun and the clouds and the atmosphere, I think it involves the temperature, they all have to align in a way, and on the screen you'll see some images of what these look like. You'll see that In the center, you have the sun itself, but then it creates this spherical phenomenon where you can have multiple lights on either side. It creates these beautiful colors, these glistening colors. If the wind's blowing and the clouds are moving relatively quickly, it can create a shimmering effect. So some skeptics believe that that is what the people at Fatima were seeing, as they were seeing this sundog. Others believe that it may have just been the way that the clouds were in the sky that day, the way that there were vapor crystals in the air causing the light to refract in such a way. Other skeptics believe that it just may be kind of a mass hysteria, that people are very suggestible, and because one or two people see it, the two people next to them may see it, and you see a cascading effect where you have thousands of individuals who are believing that they're seeing the same thing when thousands of other individuals aren't seeing it at all. There's also the argument that if you stare at the sun, it's probably going to screw up your vision. Now, a lot of individuals who were at the site during the miracle say that the sun did not hurt their eyes. If you or I walk out right now and look at the sun, it hurts, and we physically cannot continue to do it because it hurts our eyes so much we have to close our eyes or look away. Whereas these individuals say that the sun did not hurt their eyes, that it was opaque, it was a silvery light, and that it did not hurt to look at. So the tough thing is that this happened over 100 years ago. And it's really hard to justify the claims that are being made. It's hard to justify if this is a real event or not. The Catholic Church can canonize it, they can say that it's a real event. Skeptics and scientists can argue it and say that it doesn't make sense. Everyone across the world is seeing the same sun, so if people in Portugal are seeing it zigzag and spiral, why didn't people in Germany see that? Why didn't people in Africa see that? This story can quickly get into a rabbit hole of religious belief versus science, and that's not the point of the video. That's not the point I'm trying to make. What I'm simply looking at is something occurred in 1917 in Portugal, and it's really fascinating. There's a tremendous amount of eyewitnesses that saw this, and the fact that it happened 100 years ago, and we're still discussing it today, we're still unsure of what it was, that fascinates me. And I hope that it fascinates you. Now, the children do make some claims. They say that Russia will be converted, that the war will come to an end, that the Pope will be martyred. And looking back at history, those three things, aside from the war ending, didn't really happen. The war ended a full year later in 1918. The Pope was never martyred. He died of pneumonia, and I couldn't find anything extremely interesting about his life that stands out as to why he'd be considered a martyr. I did read one article, and it bluntly put that he was the least recognized or least memorable pope of the 20th century, which kind of sucks to be remembered like that.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And when it comes to the conversion of Russia, there's actually a quote that I'm going to read because I think it sums up what Russia was like in the 20th century, and it goes, "The empire had begun to make steps towards the recognition of the multiplicity of religions that it had come to encompass, but they came to an abrupt end with the Russia Revolution in 1917. After the revolution, the Russian Orthodox Church lost its privileges, as did all minority religions, and the new state verged towards an atheist official ideology." And that ideology and the turmoil around religion in Russia persisted throughout the 20th century, as the USSR didn't technically fall until the 90s. So for them to say, or for the Virgin Mary to claim that Russia would be converted, it just didn't happen. So between the war, Russia converting, the Pope being martyred, these three things don't occur. So with all of this being said, what does it all mean? We have the miracle that takes place with tens of thousands of eyewitness accounts. We have these three secrets, these three prophecies that the Virgin Mary claims is going to happen. None of them take place except for World War I ending a year later. So in the end, is this a real event? How much of it is true? And unfortunately, given that it took place over 100 years ago and the eyewitnesses are no longer around today to ask questions to, all we have to go off of are what others during that time and in the decades following documented, recorded, and investigated. A lot of what I discuss in this video stems from Lucia's personal accounts. She wrote several articles on what it is she experienced, what she witnessed. The Catholic Church did formal investigations. There is also Father John de Marchi. He investigated this thoroughly in the 1940s and into 1950, interviewing a lot of eyewitnesses. And in the end, he states that reports do vary, impressions are in minor details confused, but none to our knowledge have directly denied the visible prodigy of the sun. And really, in the end, all we can do is make our own decision on what we believe. And when it comes to what I believe, this is what I think. What fascinates me the most is you have 3 children claiming that an event is going to take place on a specific date and time. And for something to take place is bizarre. It's as if I claimed that on November 15th, 2027, some miracle is going to occur in the sky. And maybe I don't even clarify it's going to be in the sky, just say some miracle is going to occur. And then out of nowhere, we have this beautiful solar phenomenon that wasn't predicted, that it just occurs. That is what fascinates me about this situation, where especially this is 100+ years ago, these poor children who cannot read, cannot write, they have no way of knowing that there's going to be a solar phenomenon or a sundog that occurs that day. 6 months in the future, they make the claim and something happens. That to me is fascinating. The other thing that really fascinates me is the Virgin Mary claims that she's going to leave Lucia, but she's going to take the other 2 siblings. And she's going to take them relatively soon and take them to heaven. Francisco dies in April of 1919, and Jacinta dies in February of 1920. It's Jacinta's death that really fascinates me. She asks the chaplain of the hospital to bring her Holy Communion and administer extreme unction, which is basically just anointing the sick at that point, because she believes that she's going to die. And the chaplain says, "You're not going to die, you're going to be fine." And unfortunately, the very next day, the chaplain goes to the hospital and Jacinta is dead. And so for Jacinta to know that she was going to die the next day is scary, but also fascinating. And for her and Francisco to die within the next year or 2 after the miracle, that's also interesting because the Virgin Mary claims she's going to take those 2 children to heaven and leave Lucia. And Lucia goes to live on a full life. I think she passes away in the early 2000s. And so for that to take place is also interesting. So between the miracle itself, the passing of the children, regardless if the Pope isn't martyred, that the war doesn't end immediately, that Russia doesn't convert to a Catholic state, I still think that in the end, it's a really fascinating story. The fun thing about these types of stories is that if you believe in it and it's false, then there's no harm done. It's a supernatural experience, it's interesting, and it's fun to dig into. But what's truly fascinating is if you believe in it or if you don't believe in it, and it's true. And something like this did happen, because it alludes to the notion that there are things out there that we truly do not understand, and that is something that is worth exploring. why are you still here? The video is over. But if you're still here, that means you likely finished the entire video, which means that you may have liked it, and therefore I thank you. This is the first time I've ever made something like this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so, if you have any suggestions or thoughts, comments on what I can do to improve, or subjects that you would like me to look into, I would greatly appreciate that. Again, thank you for your time, and thank you for admiring my cat. Caesar is his name. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.